The morning bell rang through Jefferson High School, and students flooded the hallways like water rushing through a dam. Among them was Jake, a 17-year-old junior who thought the world revolved around him. He walked with his chest puffed out, his expensive sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. His three friends followed close behind, hanging on his every word like he was some kind of celebrity. Jake had always been this way. His parents gave him everything he wanted, and he never learned the word no. If something didn't go his way, he'd find a way to make it someone else's problem. The other students knew to stay out of his path. Teachers pretended not to see when he cut in line or talked during class. It was easier that way. "Did you guys see the new kid trying to sit at our table yesterday?" Jake said, laughing as he shouldered past a group of freshmen. "I told him to find somewhere else pretty quick." His friends laughed along, though some of them looked uncomfortable. They'd been friends with Jake since middle school, back when he was just confident, not mean. But somewhere along the way, confidence had turned into something uglier. The hallway was packed tighter than usual because of construction work blocking the east wing. Everyone had to use the same narrow corridor to get to their classes. Students moved slowly, like cars in rush hour traffic. Some carried heavy backpacks, others juggled books and binders. Everyone was trying to get to class on time. That's when Jake saw her. The girl was maybe 15, with long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She moved carefully through the crowd, balancing on crutches. Her left leg was wrapped in a thick cast from her knee down to her toes. She wore a simple blue sweater and jeans, nothing fancy. Her backpack looked heavy on her shoulders, and she was clearly struggling to keep up with the flow of students. Jake's eyes narrowed as he watched her slow progress. She was holding everyone up, making the already crowded hallway even more jammed. Students had to squeeze around her, some helping by carrying her books, others just pushing past with annoyed looks. "Great," Jake muttered to his friends. "Look at this. We're going to be late because of her." The girl heard him and glanced back, her cheeks turning red. She tried to move faster, but the crutches made it impossible. One of them caught on someone's backpack and she stumbled slightly before catching herself. "Careful there," said a kind voice. It was Mrs. Peterson, one of the English teachers, who gently steadied the girl. "Take your time, honey. You're doing fine." But Jake wasn't interested in being patient or kind. He could see his friends watching him, waiting to see what he'd do. He'd built his reputation on being the guy who didn't take anything from anyone, who always got his way. And right now this girl was in his way. "Move it," he called out, loud enough for half the hallway to hear. "Some of us have places to be." The girl's face burned with embarrassment. She tried to move to the side, pressing herself against the lockers to let people pass. But Jake wasn't satisfied. He wanted to make a point to show everyone that nobody slowed him down. As the crowd thinned out a little, Jake saw his chance. He walked up behind the girl, his friends trailing uncertainly. She was focused on navigating around a group of students who had stopped to chat, completely unaware of what was coming. "Excuse me," she said politely to the group, trying to get through. That's when Jake struck. Without warning, he lifted his foot and gave her right crutch a sharp kick. The rubber tip slipped on the smooth floor, and the crutch went flying out from under her arm. The girl's eyes went wide with shock and fear. For a split second, she tried to balance on one crutch, her arms flailing as she fought to stay upright, but it was no use. Gravity took over and she fell hard to the floor. The sound was awful. A combination of her cry of pain, her books hitting the ground, and her cast scraping against the floor. The hallway went dead silent. Students stopped talking, stopped walking, stopped everything. All eyes turned to the scene. The girl lay on her side, her face twisted in pain. Tears ran down her cheeks as she tried to sit up. Her injured leg had twisted when she fell, and she was holding it carefully, afraid to move. "My leg," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Oh God, my leg." For a moment, Jake felt something strange in his chest. Was it guilt, fear? He wasn't sure. But then he saw his friends looking at him with wide eyes and other students staring. He couldn't look weak now. He couldn't show that he felt bad about what he'd done, so instead he laughed. "Maybe watch where you're going next time," he said with a smirk, stepping over her scattered books. "Some of us don't have all day." His friends looked shocked. Even they hadn't expected him to go this far. But Jake kept walking, his head held high, pretending he didn't care about the girl crying on the floor behind him. Other students rushed to help. A senior named David immediately knelt down beside her, his face full of concern. "Are you okay? Can you move?" he asked gently, helping her sit up against the lockers. "I think so," she said through her tears. "But my leg really hurts, more than before." A girl named Lisa picked up the scattered books and backpack. "What's your name? We should get you to the nurse." "I'm Amy," she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Amy Rodriguez. I just transferred here last week." "I'm David, and this is Lisa. Don't worry, we'll help you to the nurse's office," David said, looking around for Amy's crutches. He found them a few feet away and checked to make sure they weren't broken. As they helped Amy to her feet, she winced and nearly fell again. The pain in her leg was clearly much worse than before. David and Lisa had to practically carry her, with Amy barely able to put any weight on the crutches. "That guy is such a jerk," Lisa whispered to David as they walked slowly toward the nurse's office. "Who does something like that to someone on crutches?" David glanced back at Jake, who was now at his locker, acting like nothing had happened. "I don't know, but someone should tell the principal. That wasn't just mean, it was dangerous." In the nurse's office, Mrs. Williams took one look at Amy and immediately called for an ice pack. Amy's leg was swollen and she was in visible pain. The nurse asked gentle questions about what happened, writing everything down carefully. "Sweetheart, I think we need to call your mom," Mrs. Williams said, reaching for the phone. "This might be serious. When you break a bone, any kind of fall can cause more damage." Amy nodded, still crying quietly. She gave the nurse her mother's work number, knowing her mom would be worried sick when she got the call. Meanwhile, Jake sat in his first period class trying to focus on the lesson. But he kept thinking about the sound Amy made when she hit the floor, the way she looked up at him with such hurt and confusion in her eyes. He told himself he didn't care, that she'd gotten in his way and deserved what happened. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to acknowledge, he knew he'd done something terrible. He'd hurt someone who was already hurt, someone who couldn't defend herself. And for what? To look tough in front of his friends? To save a few seconds getting to class? He pushed the thoughts away and focused on the board, telling himself that Amy would be fine, that it was no big deal. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that this moment would come back to haunt him in ways he couldn't imagine. The morning dragged on, but Jake tried to act normal. When his friends asked about what happened, he just shrugged and said the girl needed to be more careful, but he noticed they didn't laugh like they used to. Something was different in the way they looked at him now. He had no idea that Amy's mother was already on her way to the school, or that his life was about to change forever. The phone rang in the middle of Dr. Maria Rodriguez's surgery consultation. She almost ignored it, but something made her check the caller ID. Jefferson High School. Her heart skipped a beat. "Excuse me for just one moment," she told her patient, stepping into the hallway to take the call. As head of orthopedic surgery at Metropolitan Hospital, she was used to urgent calls, but school calls were different. School calls meant something was wrong with Amy. "Dr. Rodriguez? This is Mrs. Williams, the nurse at Jefferson High. I'm calling about your daughter Amy. She's had a fall and I think you should come in." Maria's professional training kicked in immediately. "What kind of fall? Is she conscious? Any head injury?" "She's conscious and alert, but she's in considerable pain. Her leg, the one with the cast, took another impact. I'm concerned about potential complications with her healing fracture." Maria was already grabbing her keys, motioning to her assistant to reschedule her afternoon appointments. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Keep her still and ice on the injury site." The drive to Amy's school felt like the longest 15 minutes of Maria's life. Her mind raced with medical possibilities, none of them good. Amy had broken her tibia in 3 places during a soccer game just 6 weeks ago. The healing process was delicate, and any trauma to the area could undo weeks of progress. But beyond the medical concerns, Maria felt something else, a mother's fierce protective instinct. Amy was her only child, her whole world since her husband died in a car accident 3 years ago. The thought of someone hurting her daughter made her hands grip the steering wheel tighter. Maria had worked hard to build their life back up after losing David. She'd thrown herself into her medical career, becoming one of the youngest department heads in the hospital's history. She'd done it all for Amy, to give her daughter the best opportunities possible. When she arrived at Jefferson High, Maria was surprised by how run down it looked. As a successful surgeon, she could have afforded private school for Amy, but her daughter had insisted on staying at the local public school with her friends after they moved to this district. The secretary recognized her immediately. "Dr. Rodriguez? Mrs. Williams is expecting you. Third door on the left." Maria found Amy lying on a cot in the nurse's office, her face pale and drawn with pain. The sight of her daughter hurting made Maria's chest tighten, but she forced herself to stay calm and professional. "Hey, baby girl," she said softly, sitting on the edge of the cot. "Tell me what happened." Amy's eyes filled with tears again. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was trying to get to class and this boy, he kicked my crutch out from under me. I fell really hard." Maria felt her blood pressure rise, but she kept her voice steady. "Someone deliberately kicked your crutch?" "His name is Jake Thompson," Mrs. Williams said quietly, joining the conversation. "Several students witnessed what happened. It was intentional." Maria's training took over as she carefully examined Amy's leg. The swelling was significant, and Amy winced when her mother touched certain spots. This wasn't just a simple stumble. "We need to get you to the hospital for new x-rays," Maria said. "But first, I want to speak with this Jake Thompson." Principal Johnson appeared in the doorway looking uncomfortable. "Dr. Rodriguez? I'm Principal Johnson. I understand there's been an incident with your daughter." Maria stood up, and suddenly the room felt smaller. At 5'6", she wasn't particularly tall, but she carried herself with the authority of someone who made life and death decisions every day. "Principal Johnson, I want to see the student who did this to my daughter. Now." "Of course. Jake is in his second period class. I'll have him brought to my office immediately." "No," Maria said firmly. "I want to see him here with Amy present. She deserves to face the person who hurt her, and he needs to see what he's done." 10 minutes later, Jake walked into the nurse's office with the casual swagger he always carried. He'd been told a parent wanted to speak with him, but he figured it would be like every other time. A lecture about respect, maybe detention. Definitely nothing serious. He looked around the room and saw Amy on the cot, her mother standing beside her, and Principal Johnson looking stern. The woman must be Amy's mom, he thought. She looked professional in her navy blue suit, but nothing too intimidating. "You wanted to see me?" Jake said, his tone bordering on bored. Maria studied him for a moment. He was tall for his age, probably played sports based on his build. His clothes were expensive, his hair perfectly styled. Everything about him screamed privilege and entitlement. "I'm Dr. Rodriguez, Amy's mother," she said calmly. "I understand you kicked my daughter's crutch this morning." Jake shrugged. "It wasn't that big a deal. She was blocking the hallway and I barely touched her crutch. She just lost her balance." Amy made a small sound of disbelief. "You kicked it hard. I saw you wind up for it." "That's not how I remember it," Jake said, not even looking at Amy. Maria watched this exchange with growing anger, but she kept her professional demeanor. "Jake, is it? Tell me, what do you know about tibial fractures?" "About what?" Jake looked confused by the sudden change of topic. "Tibial fractures. That's what my daughter has. A broken shin bone, to put it simply. Do you know how long it takes for a bone like that to heal?" Jake was starting to feel uncomfortable. This wasn't going like his usual meetings with authority figures. Usually they yelled at him, he apologized, and everyone moved on. "I don't know. A few weeks. Try 12 to 16 weeks if everything goes perfectly. And that's a big if. Any trauma to the healing bone can cause what we call delayed union or malunion. That means the bone might heal incorrectly, or not heal at all." Maria stepped closer to Jake, and he could see the controlled anger in her eyes. "When you kicked my daughter's crutch, you caused her to fall on that healing fracture. Now she's in more pain than she's been in weeks, and I won't know until we do new x-rays whether you've caused permanent damage." For the first time, Jake looked genuinely worried. But she looks fine." "I mean, she's talking and everything. She looks fine?" Maria's voice was dangerously quiet. "Look at her, Jake, really look." Jake reluctantly turned to Amy, who was wiping tears from her cheeks. Her leg was propped up on pillows, clearly swollen, and she was holding it like it caused her constant pain. "Amy is 15 years old," Maria continued. "She's an honor roll student and was the star midfielder on her soccer team before her injury. She's been working with physical therapists 3 times a week, doing painful exercises to get her strength back. She was supposed to get her cast off next month." Jake's stomach was starting to feel weird, like he'd eaten something bad. "Because of what you did this morning, she might need surgery. She might need her cast for several more months. She might never play soccer again. I didn't know," Jake stammered. "You didn't know because you didn't care to know," Maria said firmly. You saw a person struggling, someone who needed extra space and patience, and your response was to hurt her more. Principal Johnson stepped forward. Dr. Rodriguez, I want to assure you that Jake will face serious consequences for this behavior. Maria nodded but kept her eyes on Jake. The consequences from school are between you and Principal Johnson. But Jake, I want you to understand something about consequences in the real world. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I'm not just Amy's mother. I'm also a doctor. In fact, I'm the head of orthopedic surgery at Metropolitan Hospital. Do you know what that means? Jake shook his head, his cocky attitude completely gone now. It means that when people in this community get hurt, when they break bones or tear muscles or need surgery to walk again, they come to me. Their recovery, their ability to live normal lives, often depends on the decisions I make. Jake was starting to understand that this conversation was heading somewhere he didn't want to go. Your family, your friends, your neighbors, when they get hurt, there's a good chance they'll end up in my operating room. And while I would never let personal feelings affect my professional judgment, I have to wonder about the character of someone who would hurt a disabled child. The room was dead silent except for the sound of Amy's quiet crying. I have to wonder if someone who shows such cruelty to an innocent person deserves my very best effort when their family needs help. Jake felt like the floor was falling out from under him. This wasn't just about getting in trouble at school anymore. This woman had real power, adult power, the kind that could affect his whole family. Dr. Rodriguez, Principal Johnson said carefully, perhaps we should discuss Jake's disciplinary measures privately. But Maria wasn't done. She had spent 3 years building her reputation in this community, becoming known as the surgeon who went above and beyond for every patient. But seeing her daughter hurt by this entitled boy's cruelty had awakened something fierce in her. Jake, I want you to think very carefully about the choices you've made today, because actions have consequences and sometimes those consequences reach further than you ever imagined. Jake stood there, his mouth dry, finally understanding that he had messed with the wrong person. The confident, untouchable feeling he'd carried all his life was cracking, and underneath it he found something he'd never felt before, real fear. Jake walked out of the principal's office feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. 3 days of suspension, community service, and the promise of expulsion, if anything like this happened again. But worse than any of those punishments was the memory of Dr. Rodriguez's cold, controlled anger. He tried to shake it off as he drove home in his brand-new Mustang, a birthday gift from his parents. The radio was loud, the windows were down, and he told himself everything would blow over like it always did. Rich kids like him didn't really face consequences. His dad would probably make a few phone calls, write a check to the school, and everything would go back to normal. But when Jake walked through the front door of their massive house, he could tell something was wrong. His mom, Linda, was pacing in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was tense, worried in a way Jake hadn't heard before. Yes, I understand it's serious, she was saying. How long until we know for sure? Jake dropped his backpack and walked into the kitchen. His mom looked up at him, her face pale and strained. Mom, what's going on? Linda held up a finger, finishing her conversation. Thank you, doctor. We'll be there tomorrow at 9. She hung up and turned to Jake with exhausted eyes. That was about your father. The specialist wants to see us tomorrow morning. His back injury is worse than they thought. Jake's dad, Robert Thompson, had been hurt in a construction accident 6 weeks ago. A steel beam had fallen, crushing 2 vertebrae in his lower back. Jake knew it was serious, but his dad was tough. He'd always bounced back from everything. What do you mean worse? The doctor says there might be nerve damage. Your father could need surgery, maybe more than one surgery. And even then, Linda's voice trailed off, even then what? He might not walk normally again. He might need a wheelchair or crutches or... She couldn't finish the sentence. Jake felt his stomach drop. His dad was his hero, 6'3", strong as an ox. The kind of man who could fix anything and never showed weakness. The idea of him in a wheelchair was impossible to imagine. Which doctor are you seeing? Jake asked, though he wasn't sure why. Dr. Rodriguez at Metropolitan Hospital. She's supposed to be the best orthopedic surgeon in the state. Your father's been seeing her for weeks now, and tomorrow she'll tell us if he needs the experimental surgery. The name hit Jake like a physical blow. Rodriguez. Dr. Rodriguez. It couldn't be the same person. There had to be dozens of doctors with that name in the city, but even as he told himself that, Jake knew the truth. The way she'd looked at him in the nurse's office, the way she'd talked about consequences and character. She'd been telling him that she held his father's future in her hands. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Amy falling to the floor, the sound she made when she hit the ground. He thought about Dr. Rodriguez's calm, professional voice as she explained how his actions might have permanently damaged Amy's leg. And he thought about his father, lying in bed down the hall, probably awake too, worried about whether he'd ever walk without pain again. The next morning, Jake begged to go with his parents to the hospital appointment. He told them he was worried about Dad, which was true, but really he needed to see if Dr. Rodriguez was the same woman who had stared him down 3 days ago. Metropolitan Hospital was huge and intimidating, all white walls and echoing hallways. Jake followed his parents to the orthopedic surgery wing, his heart pounding with each step. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But when they walked into the consultation room, Jake's worst fears were confirmed. Dr. Rodriguez stood behind her desk, reviewing a thick file of X-rays and test results. She was wearing a white coat over her professional clothes, and her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun. She looked exactly like what she was, a successful surgeon at the top of her field. When she looked up and saw Jake, her expression didn't change, but he caught something in her eyes, recognition and disappointment. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," she said professionally. "Please have a seat, and you must be their son." "This is Jake," Robert said, settling carefully into his chair. The movement clearly caused him pain. "He wanted to come today." Dr. Rodriguez nodded politely, but Jake could feel her studying him. She knew exactly who he was. "I have the results of your latest MRI," she began, turning to Robert. "I'm afraid the news isn't what we were hoping for." She clipped several images to a light board and pointed to dark spots on the X-rays. "The damage to your L3 and L4 vertebrae is more extensive than we initially thought. You have significant nerve compression here and here." Linda grabbed Robert's hand. "What does that mean?" "It means that without surgical intervention, Mr. Thompson will likely lose more function in his legs over time. The pain will get worse, and eventually he may not be able to walk at all." Jake watched his father's face crumble. This strong, proud man who had built houses with his bare hands was being told he might never walk again. "But surgery is an option?" Robert asked. Dr. Rodriguez paused, and in that pause Jake felt his entire world hanging in the balance. "There is a procedure I can perform. It's complex, risky, and not every surgeon is qualified to do it. I've done it successfully many times, but it requires my complete focus and commitment." She turned slightly, and Jake felt her gaze fall on him again. "The surgery involves removing bone fragments and scar tissue that are pressing on your spinal cord, then stabilizing the vertebrae with titanium rods. It's a 12-hour operation that demands absolute precision." "And if it works?" Linda asked. "If it works, your husband could make a full recovery. He might return to work, play with grandchildren someday, live a completely normal life." "And if it doesn't work?" Dr. Rodriguez's expression was grave. "If it doesn't work, he could be paralyzed from the waist down." The room fell silent. Jake could hear his mother's quiet crying, his father's heavy breathing. The weight of the decision pressed down on all of them. "Doctor," Robert said slowly, "I have to ask, are you willing to do this surgery? Will you give me your best effort?" Dr. Rodriguez looked at Robert, then at Linda, and finally at Jake. Her face was unreadable, professional, but Jake could see her mind working. "Mr. Thompson, that's an interesting question. As a surgeon, I take an oath to do no harm, to give every patient my very best care regardless of personal feelings. But I also believe that medicine is about more than just technical skill. It's about compassion, about caring for the whole person and their family." Jake felt sick. She was going to say no. She was going to refuse to help his father because of what he'd done to Amy. "I've been thinking a lot lately about character, about the kind of people we choose to be when we think no one is watching, about how we treat those who are vulnerable, who need our help instead of our cruelty." Jake's mother looked confused. "Doctor, I'm not sure I understand." Dr. Rodriguez continued, never taking her eyes off Jake. "Your son and I met earlier this week under different circumstances. He hurt someone I care about very much, someone who was already injured and struggling." The color drained from Linda's face. "Jake, what did you do?" I kicked a girl's crutch, Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. She fell and got hurt worse. Robert stared at his son in horror. You did what? The girl was my daughter, Dr. Rodriguez said quietly. Amy Rodriguez. She's 15, and she's been working so hard to recover from her own leg injury. Your son saw her struggling in a crowded hallway and decided to make her day worse. Jake wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never be seen again. His parents were looking at him like they didn't recognize him, like he was a stranger who had somehow replaced their son. Dr. Rodriguez, Linda said, her voice shaking. I am so sorry. We had no idea. We raised him better than this, did you? Dr. Rodriguez asked calmly. Because the boy I met showed no empathy, no remorse, no understanding of how his actions affected another person. He laughed when my daughter cried. Jake felt tears starting to form in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said, though the words felt completely inadequate. I'm so sorry. Dr. Rodriguez studied him for a long moment. Are you sorry because you hurt someone, Jake? Or are you sorry because it turns out there were consequences for you? The question hung in the air like a blade. Jake wanted to say he was sorry for hurting Amy, but he wasn't even sure that was true. Mostly he was terrified of what Dr. Rodriguez might do to his family. I can see I have a decision to make, Dr. Rodriguez said finally. I can perform your father's surgery, Mr. Thompson. I am fully capable of giving you the best possible outcome, but I need to know that this family understands the gravity of what happened this week. She stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city below. Your son hurt my daughter because he thought he could, because no one had ever taught him that other people's pain matters, because he believed there would be no real consequences for his actions. Jake felt like he was drowning. Everything in his life that he'd taken for granted, his popularity, his parents' wealth, his sense of invincibility was crumbling around him. I'll do the surgery, Dr. Rodriguez said, turning back to face them. But not for free, and not just the surgery. Jake is going to learn what it means to care for people who are struggling. He's going to volunteer at our rehabilitation center, where he'll meet patients who would give anything to have the mobility he threw away so carelessly. She looked directly at Jake, and he could see both anger and something else in her eyes. Maybe hope. You're going to learn empathy, young man. You're going to understand what it feels like to help instead of hurt. And maybe, just maybe, you'll become the kind of person who deserves a father who can walk. The coffee shop near Jefferson High was nearly empty at 3 in the afternoon. Jake sat at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate he wasn't drinking, watching the door with nervous energy. Kelly had arranged this meeting after speaking with Dr. Rodriguez, but Jake still wasn't sure Amy would actually show up. 3 weeks had passed since he started volunteering at the rehabilitation center. His father's surgery was scheduled for tomorrow morning, and Dr. Rodriguez had finally agreed to meet with Jake today to discuss his progress. But first, Jake had asked for this chance to apologize to Amy properly. The bell above the door chimed, and Jake looked up to see Amy walking in slowly, still using crutches but moving more easily than she had that day in the hallway. Her mother was with her, and both of them looked cautious but not hostile. Jake stood up quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. Amy, Mrs. Dr. Rodriguez, thank you for coming. Dr. Rodriguez nodded coolly. You said you had something important to say to Amy. Make it count. Amy chose a chair across from Jake, setting her crutches carefully against the table. She looked different somehow. Older, more serious, but not broken. Jake felt a rush of relief that she seemed to be healing well. I don't really know how to start, Jake began, his voice shaky. I've been practicing what to say for days, but now that you're here, it all sounds wrong. Amy watched him with dark eyes that seemed to see right through him. Just tell me why you did it. The simple question hit Jake harder than any lecture could have. Because I was selfish. Because I was impatient. Because I thought my time was more important than your pain. He took a shaky breath. But mostly because I was a terrible person who had never learned to think about anyone but myself. Was? Dr. Rodriguez asked pointedly. I'm trying not to be that person anymore, Jake said. I know that doesn't fix what I did to Amy. I know saying sorry doesn't make her leg heal faster or take away the extra pain I caused her. But I need you both to know that what I did haunts me every single day. Amy leaned forward slightly. Kelly told my mom you've been volunteering at the rehab center. Yeah. Your mom is making me, as part of the deal for my dad's surgery, but... Jake paused, trying to find the right words. It started as punishment, but it's become something else. I've met people there who are fighting every day for things I always took for granted. He told them about Tommy, working so hard to walk across a room, about Mrs. Chen celebrating being able to brush her own hair, about Sophie, the dancer who was redefining what movement meant to her life. There's this kid there, maybe 8 years old, named Carlos, Jake continued. He was born with spina bifida, and he's never walked without crutches. But he's the happiest person I've ever met. He tells jokes, he encourages the adults when they're struggling. He celebrates everyone's victories like they're his own. Amy's expression was softening, but she still looked guarded. Carlos uses the same kind of crutches you do, Jake said quietly, and every time I see him moving through the center, so careful and determined, I think about what I did to you. I think about how I could have hurt someone like Carlos, someone who needs those crutches to be independent, to have dignity. Dr. Rodriguez had been listening silently, but now she spoke. What have you learned, Jake? Really learned, not just what you think we want to hear. Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking. I learned that everyone is fighting battles I can't see. Amy wasn't just a girl blocking the hallway. She was someone recovering from a serious injury, probably scared about whether she'd heal right, probably self-conscious about the cast and the crutches. He looked directly at Amy. I learned that when you hurt someone who's already struggling, you don't just cause physical pain. You make them feel unsafe in the world. You make them wonder if people are cruel or kind. You steal a little bit of their faith in humanity. Amy's eyes were getting watery, but she didn't look away. And I learned that I had the power to help instead of hurt. And I chose to hurt. That's on me. That's who I was. But I'm trying to be different now. How are you different? Amy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I notice people now. Really notice them. When I see someone struggling with heavy books, I offer to help. When someone drops something, I pick it up. When the cafeteria lady looks tired, I ask how her day is going. Jake's voice grew stronger. I started an anti-bullying group at school. We meet twice a week and talk about how to create a culture where people look out for each other, instead of tearing each other down. Dr. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. That's quite a change from the boy I met a month ago. I know it doesn't erase what I did, Jake said quickly. But maybe it means the person I hurt won't be hurt for nothing. Maybe Amy's pain will have meaning if it helps me become someone who prevents other people from getting hurt. Amy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Can I tell you something? Jake nodded. After you kicked my crutch, I was scared to go to school for weeks. Not just because of the pain in my leg, but because I kept wondering if someone else would hurt me. I felt like I had a target on my back. Jake felt sick hearing this. Amy, I'm so sorry. Let me finish, she said gently. But then something amazing happened. Other students started looking out for me. David and Lisa, who helped me that day, they introduced me to their friends. People started carrying my books without me asking. Someone always saved me a seat at lunch where I could prop up my leg. She smiled through her tears. Your cruelty showed me how many kind people there are in the world. It made me appreciate every act of gentleness. Dr. Rodriguez reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. Amy has been remarkable through all of this. She's turned her experience into advocacy for disability rights at school. I started a peer support group for students with injuries or disabilities, Amy said. We help each other navigate the school and we educate other students about what it's like to need accommodations. Jake stared at her in amazement. You turned something horrible into something that helps people. We both did, Amy said simply. You changed too. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the past month settling between them. Jake, Dr. Rodriguez said finally, I want you to know that I've been watching your progress at the rehab center. Kelly gives me reports every few days. Jake's heart started pounding. Tomorrow is his father's surgery. She tells me you arrive early and stay late, that you've learned every patient's name and their story, that you celebrate their victories and comfort them through setbacks. They've taught me more than I've helped them, Jake said honestly. That's exactly what Kelly said you would say. She also said that when no one is looking, you've been doing research on adaptive equipment and accessibility improvements, that you wrote a proposal for making the school more wheelchair-friendly. Jake blushed. I just noticed things that could be better. Dr. Rodriguez smiled for the first time since he'd met her. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to perform your father's surgery, and I'm going to give him everything I have. Every ounce of my skill and experience because I believe people can change, because I believe in redemption. Jake felt tears start to flow down his cheeks. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when your father is walking again, and when you graduate from high school having never hurt another person in my daughter's position." Amy spoke up. "Jake, would you like to come to our peer support group sometime? Not to apologize again, but to share your story, to help other students understand how their actions affect people with disabilities." "I would be honored," Jake said, meaning every word. 6 months later, Jake stood on the sideline of a soccer field, cheering as Amy scored the winning goal for Jefferson High. Her recovery had been complete, her legs stronger than ever. She'd dedicated the season to all the patients at the rehab center who were still fighting to walk. In the stands, Robert Thompson sat with his wife, walking again without any assistance. The surgery had been a complete success, and he'd returned to work just last month. He was proud of many things: his recovery, his wife's strength, his son's transformation, but mostly he was proud that Jake had become the kind of person worth being proud of. After the game, Jake met Amy by the team bench. "Great goal," he said, handing her a bottle of water. "Thanks. Did you see that Carlos made it up the stairs to watch? He's been working on stair climbing for months." Jake smiled. Carlos had become one of his closest friends at the rehab center, and seeing the 8-year-old's joy at reaching the bleachers had been the highlight of Jake's day. "Hey, Jake," Amy said as they walked toward the parking lot. "I wanted to tell you something. My mom is presenting a paper next month about trauma-informed care and patient recovery. She's including a section about how witnessing genuine redemption can be part of the healing process." "Really?" "She's calling it the Rodriguez-Thompson method," Amy said with a grin. "Your transformation has become part of medical research." Jake laughed, still amazed at how his life had changed. "Think she'll mention that the Thompson part of the method started with being a complete jerk?" "That's the most important part," Amy said seriously. "You can't have redemption without first admitting you need to be redeemed." As they reached the parking lot, Jake saw his parents waiting by their car, his father standing tall and strong. Dr. Rodriguez was there too, having come to watch Amy play. She waved at Jake with genuine warmth. A year ago, Jake had been the kind of person who hurt others for his own convenience. Today, he was the kind of person who spent his weekends reading to elderly patients and his evenings tutoring kids with learning disabilities. He'd learned that the best way to feel good about yourself wasn't to put others down, but to lift them up. The boy who had kicked the crutch was gone forever. In his place stood a young man who understood that true strength came from protecting the vulnerable, not exploiting them. And every day he worked to prove that people really could change, that redemption was possible, and that even the worst mistakes could become the foundation for a better life. As Jake drove home that night, he thought about all the people who had shaped his transformation: Amy's forgiveness, his parents' disappointment that led to reflection, Dr. Rodriguez's tough love, and all the patients at the rehab center who had shown him what courage really looked like. He'd learned that being the person others could count on felt infinitely better than being the person others feared. And he'd learned that sometimes the worst thing you ever do can become the catalyst for becoming the best version of yourself. The road ahead was bright with possibility,